There are times when just one word, one look, is enough to make you angry all day. But you know what? True strength lies not in reacting immediately, but in mindful silence. The strongest person is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who knows how to stay calm when everything around is chaotic. If you learn not to react, how will your life change? The sun dipped low behind marble towers as trumpets roared across the palace courtyard. Velvet banners fluttered in the golden breeze. A great king, proud, powerful, feared across nations, had arrived in a neighboring land known not for its military might, but for its wisdom. His journey was one of honor, curiosity, and pride. The host king welcomed him with reverence, offering not just his friendship, but a feast fit for the gods. Long tables shimmered with golden plates, crystal goblets, and delicacies from every corner of the realm. Musicians played soft melodies as servants moved with grace, presenting dish after dish with careful precision. The hall pulsed with nobility, silence laced with awe as all eyes turned to the visiting monarch. As the soup course arrived, steaming, rich, and spiced to perfection, the visiting king lifted his spoon, but before it reached his lips, his gaze sharpened. Floating carelessly atop the surface of the broth was something small, a fly. Silent, insignificant. But in that moment, it became everything. The king's face tightened with disgust. His hand crashed against the table, shaking silverware and silencing conversation. "Bring me another bowl," he snapped, voice sharp like steel. "What sort of insult is this?" The servants froze. The nobles stiffened. The entire room held its breath. All the power, all the grandeur, and it unraveled because of a single insect. But instead of reacting in fear or flattery, the host king rose from his seat. With a calmness that seemed to quiet the very air around him, he stepped forward and bowed gently. His voice, soft but unwavering, carried through the room. "Your Majesty," he said, "please don't let this trouble your heart. It is not the fly that has disturbed your peace. It is your reaction to it." The words fell like a stone into still water. The visiting king, fierce and furious just moments before, blinked. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Not because he was angry, but because he was stunned. No one had ever dared speak to him this way. And yet something about the truth in those words cut deeper than his pride. He realized, in that silence, that the fly held no power. It was he who had given it power, through his reaction, through his surrender to emotion. The king's moment of awakening might feel like a distant tale from another time, but the truth it holds is timeless. Because while palaces and crowns may fade, the battle between emotion and self-control lives on, in people like you and people like Michael. Michael didn't wear a crown, but he carried the same struggle in his chest every day. He wasn't a ruler of kingdoms. He was a regular man, living in the noise and rush of modern life. But just like the king, it didn't take much to set him off. A co-worker's criticism, a loved one's sarcastic remark, even a late text reply. That was enough to trigger something inside him. A burning frustration. A knot in his chest. A sharp response. And just like that, he would say something he didn't mean. Hurt someone he cared about. And then spend the rest of the night staring at the ceiling, haunted by regret. Over and over again, emotion led the way. And Michael followed blindly. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't broken. He was just reactive. And reactions, when left unchecked, are like sparks in a dry forest. Fast, destructive, and almost always regrettable. Michael's words had weight, and when anger held the pen, they cut deep. Relationships began to wither. People walked on eggshells around him. And yet, behind the frustration, was a man who genuinely wanted to love, to connect, to be better. But he didn't know how to stop the storm inside. Until one night, the night everything changed. They had been arguing again, he and the woman he loved. It wasn't about anything big. It never was. But his voice rose. Hers trembled. And then, as his words landed like blows, her face broke, and the tears came. She didn't fight back. She didn't run. She just stood there, shattered. And in that silence, something in Michael finally cracked. Later, he found himself alone in the bathroom, gripping the sides of the sink. The mirror stared back, cold and honest. His reflection wasn't the angry man from moments ago. It was a child in pain, a heart aching for change. And in a whisper, barely audible even to himself, he asked, "Why am I like this? Why do I keep hurting the people I love?" His voice trembled, and his eyes welled up. Not from guilt, but from exhaustion. He was tired. Tired of being hijacked by his own emotions. Tired of the cycle. Tired of apologizing for reactions he couldn't control. That moment, that mirror, was his turning point. Change didn't come in a flash of light or a moment of triumph. It came in silence. After that night, Michael didn't make grand promises or declarations. He didn't post quotes or vow to be better by morning. Instead, he started with something small, something unfamiliar, even uncomfortable: stillness. For the first time in years, he chose to sit with his feelings instead of fleeing from them. No music, no distractions, just him and the emotions he used to run from. He found a local meditation group, not because he believed in magic or ancient wisdom, but because he needed to slow down. He needed space between the trigger and the reaction. He started practicing mindfulness, not the kind on bumper stickers, but the real, raw kind. Sitting in silence, feeling the tension rise, breathing through the heat of anger, and choosing consciously not to act on it right away. It was strange at first, hard even. The silence felt louder than any argument. But slowly, in that quiet space, he discovered something he had never known before. He wasn't his emotions. He could observe them. He could name them. And when he did that, he didn't have to obey them. Of course, he didn't become a saint overnight. There were still moments when frustration flared up, when his voice rose, when the old habits kicked in. But now, something was different. He noticed. After every slip, instead of spiraling into guilt, he paused and reflected. What made me react? Where did that come from? Can I do better next time? And slowly, not perfectly, but steadily, the answer began to shift from no to maybe, from maybe to yes. There's something beautiful about the beginning of a transformation. It doesn't look like success. It looks like falling and standing back up. It looks like catching yourself mid-sentence. It looks like a single deep breath instead of a shout. And it looks like hope. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that whispers, "This time, I'm trying differently." It didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't something Michael ever announced. But slowly, subtly, people began to notice. His co-workers, The ones who used to tiptoe around his moods started speaking to him more openly. Conversations no longer ended in tension. Meetings didn't feel like landmines. At home, his partner no longer flinched when bringing up hard topics. His responses were measured, thoughtful, even when things got uncomfortable. He still felt emotion, of course. But now, there was space between the feeling and the action. A breath, a pause, a choice. Michael had become someone different, not just on the outside, but from the inside out. He didn't carry the same heavy energy he used to. He no longer looked like someone always ready to defend or explode. Instead, he became the person people came to when they needed clarity, calm, a listening ear, not because he had all the answers, but because he had learned how to hold space. He had learned that strength isn't always volume. Sometimes it's restraint. Sometimes it's being the one in the room who doesn't react, but listens, feels, and responds with grace. One afternoon, a close friend opened up to him. The conversation was raw, emotional. At the end of it, the friend looked at him and said, "You always make people feel safe. You don't judge. You don't explode. How do you do it?" Michael smiled, not out of pride, but because he remembered who he used to be. And then, with quiet honesty, he replied, "It's not that I don't get angry. I just learned not to let my anger control me." There was no sermon, no ego, just truth, lived, practiced, and passed on. In the end, it wasn't about the fly. It wasn't about the soup. It wasn't even about the argument or the raised voices. It was always about what we choose to do in the space between the trigger and the response. And long before the king learned that, long before Michael found his mirror moment, there was a teacher, one who understood the battlefield within better than anyone, Gautam Buddha. Buddha once said, "You will not be punished for your anger. You will be punished by your anger." And he was right. Anger doesn't just hurt others, it hurts us. It drains our peace, poisons our joy, and blinds our clarity. He also taught, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And isn't that exactly what we do? We cling to resentment, thinking it makes us strong, when all it does is make us suffer longer. Then comes the most powerful truth. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. In other words, your reactions don't just shape your day. They shape who you are becoming. So now this story, this journey, isn't about a king or a man named Michael. It's about you. You, the one watching. The one who's been angry, who's said things they regret. The one who's been hurt, reactive, overwhelmed. You, who deep down wants to be calm, wants to be free, wants to respond with strength, not explode in weakness. Here's the truth. You may not control what happens next, but you always control how you respond. And sometimes, just one calm breath can rewrite the rest of your day, maybe even your life.